Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good morning. A warm welcome to all participants from Malaysia, the SEAMEO network and affiliated countries to IMR-SEAMEO webinar series 2023. The theme today is Maverick Study, the first large-scale scientific bioresource of first-onset myocardial infarction in Malaysia. Maverick is short for Malaysian Acute Vascular Events Risk. Our presenters today are from the Institute for Medical Research IMR in Malaysia. I am Muhammad Naim Muhammad Nawi from Nutrition Unit, Nutrition, Metabolism and Cardiovascular Research Center, NMCRC IMR, and will be the moderator for today's session. NMCRC in general is involved in conducting research, training, and consultation with regards to the biomedical aspects of non-communicable disease (NCDs), as well as inborn error of metabolism (IEM). NMCRC is made up of 4 different units: nutrition, endocrine and metabolic, cardiovascular, and IEM genetics. The nutrition unit carries out impactful nutrition research focusing on nutritional biochemistry and analytical food chemistry to address national health priority areas. This includes iodine deficiency disorder, IDD, and food composition database, FCD, which counts World Health Organization, WHO, and Food Agriculture Organization, FAO, as the 2 most prominent collaborators. The second unit is endocrine and metabolic unit. Research work carried out in the endocrine and metabolic unit covers diabetes and endocrinology-related topics. It involves cell culture, animal models, and clinical and community-based research. This involves biochemistry, molecular techniques, and recently exploring metabolomics in obesity and diabetes. Next is the IEM and genetics unit. The IEM and genetics unit aims to develop high-quality research for IEM and genetic disorders for the betterment and cost-effectiveness of patient care. The focus research of the unit is the development of new potential therapies, development of new rapid screening, as well as detection methods and biochemical and molecular profiling of biomarkers. Cardiovascular unit was established after the commencement of the Maverick study. Its current focus is to generate a multidisciplinary approach in understanding the local risk factors of coronary heart disease to promote further scientific discoveries for the improvement of cardiovascular health of Malaysians. Our 2 presenters today will share the Maverick study team's experience, findings, and achievements thus far, as well as future plans related to the study. Ladies and gentlemen, this webinar series was initiated with the aim in mind to share the knowledge, discuss topics on biomedical research, and present research outcomes. Before we begin the presentations, allow me to announce a few housekeeping messages from the Secretariat. Number 1, we will not be taking questions during the presentation, but participants may post their questions using the link shared in the YouTube channel. Number 2, the question and answer Q&A session will be conducted after both presentations have ended. Number 3, an attendance link is also provided in the YouTube channel for those who would like to receive an e-certificate of attendance. And lastly, number 4, please subscribe to our National Institute of Health Malaysia YouTube channel and click for notifications whenever there is a new post. Ladies and gentlemen, for today's webinar, we have 2 speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Zhuan, who is a medical officer in cardiovascular unit under NMCRC IMR. He obtained his medical degree from Nizhny Novgorod State Medical Academy, Russia. He completed his housemanship for 2 years in Hospital Sultanah Bahiyah, Kedah. Then, he worked in cardiology department in Hospital Queen Elizabeth II, Kota Kinabalu, Sabah for 6 years before joining IMR. His research field is cardiology, and his current research is looking into relation of lipids in heart attack with mortality. His presentation today is titled Insights from the Maverick Study, Rationale, Study Design, and Findings. Dr. Zhuan, the screen is yours.
Good morning to all. Thank you, Naim, for the kind introductions. I am Dr. Zhuan, a medical officer from Cardiovascular Unit, NMCRC IMR. I'm very honored today to able to represent the Maverick team to participate in IMR-SEAMEO webinar. So without further ado, let's start with this talk titled as Insights from the Maverick Study, the rationale, the study design, and findings. So on the first slides, let's explore together the background of the study. Coronary heart disease, or as we call it, CHD, is a leading cause of death in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. Malaysia has seen an increase in CHD incidents in recent decades. CHD events, commonly presented as heart attack, or in Malay we call sakit jantung, or medically termed myocardial infarction, MI, occur at younger ages and with more severe clinical features in Southeast Asian populations. There is, however, limited evidence on the determinants of CHD in Malaysia. Therefore, it is vital to have a deeper understanding of heart attacks determinants among Malaysians. This study aims to address less well-characterized factors, such as environmental toxic metals, indigenous forms of tobacco, unique local dietary and nutritional factors. Keep in mind, Malaysia is a country highly informative population for identifying genetic risk factors for MI and related traits. Therefore, MAVERIK, which stands for Malaysian Acute Vascular Event Risk Study, it aims to investigate genomic, lipid-related, and other determinants of acute MI in Malaysia. So this study is a big study in Malaysia. It collaborates with two countries, Malaysia and UK. So Maverick Study itself is a collaboration between Nutrition, Metabolism and Cardiovascular Research Center and MCRC from IMR and the Cardiovascular Epidemiology Unit CEU from University of Cambridge in UK. The study was funded by Newton Ungku Omar Fund for the UK-Malaysia Bilateral Health Research Collaboration in NCDs. The team from IMR is led by Dr. Muhammad Fairul Nizar, Muhammad Noor, while the team from University of Cambridge was led previously by Dr. Rajiv Chaudhry and currently led by Prof. Dr. John Danesh. Here is a long list of hospitals all across Malaysia. These are the hospitals involved in our studies. We try to be more inclusive in all Malaysian hospitals, including all states. So the criteria for selecting these hospitals mainly are general hospitals, and they should have, if possible, tertiary hospital with a cardiovascular services. As you can see, 17 hospitals from the top, we have Hospital Sedang from Selangor, HKL from KL, even from Penang, Ipoh, Perlis, Kedah, and on the East Coast, Kelantan, Terengganu, and subsequently Pahang, Selangor back again, Melaka, Johor, and even the East Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak. So now, let's explore the goals and the purpose of this study. The goal of the study is to establish first large-scale scientific bioresource in Malaysia. As for the purpose, I listed 4 over here. Number 1, it is to enable assumption-free discovery, leveraging on Malaysia's unique history of multi-ethnicity and consanguinity through genomic studies of myocardial infarctions and cardiometabolic rate traits. And the second one, there is potential downstream studies to elucidate the mechanistic basis of CHD and inform therapeutic target identification and prioritizations. Number 3, detailed evaluation of candidate cardiovascular risk factors specific to Malaysian population, such as indigenous forms of tobacco consumption and local dietary patterns with potential implication for public health policy. Last but not least, is a collaboration between Malaysian and UK scientists for joint management and data set harvesting for research platform. So now, let's look into the study objective. It is to study the potential genetic and biochemical risk factors of early onset incident MI in the Malaysian population. The lifestyle-related cardiovascular risk factors of specific relevance to the Malaysian population. Example, tobacco consumption and local diet. Here, this slide is a summary of the study methodology. On the top left corner, you can see the study was designed as a retrospective case control study. As for the study duration and period, it started in June 2017 and luckily we are able to finish in June 2019, just before the pandemic. As for the sample size, it was designed for 5,000 participants. In actual, we recruited 5,047 participants with 2,547 participants of cases and 2,500 controls. The cases were identified as first onset of MI, diagnosed based on Clinical Practice Guideline, our CPG. And the controls were blood donors and hospital visitors with matched age with 5 years bands and also match their gender and race. This slide, we can see the inclusion criteria. On the left is for the cases, as for on the right is for the controls. So let's go through on the left. The first, Malaysians residing in Malaysia. Adults, more than 18 years of age. Present at the hospital after the onset of clinical symptoms suggestive of MI, lasting longer than 20 minutes at least. The fourth one, confirmed diagnosis of acute MI based on the Malaysian CPG. No previous CVD here, which is defined as MI, coronary revascularization, cardiac arrhythmias, rheumatic disease, infective endocarditis, transient ischemic attack, stroke, other cardiovascular diseases or evidence of CVD on the ECG prior or in other medical records. Last but not least, not concurrently hospitalized for any MI or CVD events. As for the controls, they have to be Malaysians residing in Malaysia, age more than 18 years old, frequency matched to cases by age, sex, and self-reported ethnicity. No previous self-reported history of CVD. Identified in the same hospital as the index cases or collaborating hospitals in the same region. Now, let's go through the exclusion criteria. Both cases and the controls share the same sets of exclusion criteria. The first here is that they shouldn't have documented chronic conditions on past medical history, such as thyroid disease, malignancy, any chronic infection, leprosy, malaria, TB, or bacterial or parasitic infections, chronic inflammatory disorders, chronic hepatitis, or CKD, chronic kidney disease, and severe anemia, which is defined by hemoglobin less than 8 grams per deciliter on past medical histories. For the CKD cases, if the information is available, we use a threshold of eGFR less than 60, which is in the GFR category of G3A to G5, for at least 3 months to define the CKD for our study purpose. Then the next exclusion criteria, the patient or participant shouldn't have recent history of surgery in the last 3 months. They shouldn't be taking antibiotics. They should not be known to be taking or abuse drugs in the last 3 years. They are not supposed to be pregnant while we are recruiting them. And if they are unwilling or unable to provide, if they are unwilling and unable to provide consent, then we'll exclude them. So, for the research flow, we start with the top left, with the surveillance. We survey for the cases and controls. We survey the cases in cardiology or medical wards. As for the controls, as I said before, we take them from the visitors and the blood donors. Then we proceed with recruitment for the eligible participants after screening. Then, for blood taking, a total of 20 ml of blood will be withdrawn. Blood processing, centrifugation and aliquoting of blood samples into 11 cryovials to be distributed to IMR and University of Cambridge. We'll proceed with questionnaire, which will look at past medical history, family history, and social history, and also 104 item of food frequency questionnaires. As for anthropometry, we'll measure their height, weight, waist and hip circumference measurements, random blood sugar, and also global risk calculation for controls. Here, we look at the blood processing. A total of 20 ml of blood will be taken, and it will be separated into 4 tubes. 2 of serum tubes, which will be 5 ml each, and the other 2 for EDTA tubes. So for the serum tubes, the samples will be centrifuged and divided into 2 of 1.25 mils of aliquots and 2 of residual aliquots. As for the EDTA tubes, it will be aliquoted as 2 0.9 mils and 1 whole mil of whole blood aliquots. Remaining whole blood will be centrifuged. The plasma obtained was then divided into 2 1 mil aliquots and 2 residual aliquots. The blood transportation and storage is here. It will be stored in -20 degrees Celsius or -80 degrees Celsius freezers, depending on availability, since our study is located all over Malaysia in the hospitals. So it's either in the local study site hospital, and then it will be shipped at regular intervals on dry ice to the central repository in Kuala Lumpur. 5 aliquots, which comprise of 2 serums, 1 whole blood, and 2 plasmas, are kept at IMR's repository for subsequent analysis, whereas the remaining 6 aliquots, 2 serums, 2 whole bloods, and 2 plasmas were shipped on dry ice to Cambridge at the end of study for subsequent analysis as well. Here is the questionnaire groups. We collected on groups like cereals and cereal products, fast foods, meat, fish, eggs, legumes, milk, vegetables, fruits, drinks and alcoholic drinks, confectionaries, bread spread, flavors even, and others. So what actually to have to keep in mind here is that we try to incorporate our local culture. So we put in things more like nasi lemak, nasi dagang, roti telur, even things like tofu, taufu fa, even ulam-ulaman to represent our cultures. Now let's go into our results. These slides, we can see the baseline characteristic, which actually shared by the case and the control same. A total of 2,547 cases and 2,500 controls were recruited. The mean age of the study population is 50.3 years, and 91.2% of them were male. As for the ethnicity, the Malay comprised the main one, which is 58%, whereas the Chinese, 13.5%, the Indian, 19.1%, and others, which are the Bumiputras, the Aborigines in Sabah, Sarawak, and all, 5.8%. So here we look at the results on smoking. Approximately 61.5% of MI cases were current smokers, compared with only 33.5% of them in the controls. Cigarette consumption in smokers was higher among cases than in controls. The prevalence of tobacco consumption by chewing and vaping was low and did not significantly differ among cases and controls as seen over here. As for the conventional risk factors, we can see prevalence of high blood pressure, which is BP, hypertension, diabetes mellitus, and family history of CHD were higher in MI cases compared to controls. MI cases had higher median levels of waist to hip ratio than controls. Median levels of BMI were not significantly different between MI cases and controls. As for the social demographic, we can see over here, MI cases had a higher percentage of individuals with a monthly income below 1,500 ringgit compared to controls. As for the education level, MI cases had a higher percentage of individuals with educational attainment up to primary school levels or lower compared to controls. And it can be seen is inverse in bachelor or diploma and master or higher. It's more in the controls rather than the cases. This is the logistic regression model, which is after adjusted for age and sex. Current smoking has a strong association with MI, with odds ratio of 4.11, whereas previous smoking was associated with an increase of MI, with odds ratio of 1.34. History of high blood pressure and diabetes mellitus were both associated with MI, with odds ratio of 2.13 and 2.72 respectively. Family history of CHD was associated with a slightly increase of risk of MI, with odds ratio of 1.28. obesity, here defined as more than 30, was associated with a slightly increase with odds ratio of 1.19. So, the Maverick study was established in Malaysia to investigate the risk factors for acute MI. The paper presents the study design and initial findings, which actually can draw several conclusions. Number one, the study utilized modern epidemiological methods and collected various biological samples. Number two, the mean age at first confirmed MI in Malaysia is 50 years old, indicating a high prevalence of premature cardiovascular disease. And number three, the study focuses on the multi-ethnic population of Malaysia, which has a unique genetic architecture to identify population-specific genetic risk factors for MI. And four, initial data analysis confirms the accuracy of MI outcomes and show association with conventional risk factors like high blood pressure, diabetes, family history of coronary diseases, and higher waist to hip ratio. Socioeconomic status indicators also show an inverse association with MI risk, similar to the patterns in high-income populations and worldwide. So here we can overview the study strength, limitations, and challenges. As for the strength of the study, it is a large sample size study. It has rapid and cost-effective accrual of large numbers of cases. It's very inclusive. It has broad geographic and ethnic scope. It has comprehensive assessment of genetic and non-genetic risk factors for acute MI. As for the limitations, it is a retrospective case control study, which has limited the establishment of temporal relationship between risk factors and MI. There is a possibility of selection bias here. And there's also inability to screen for silent MI in our controls. As for the challenges, there's a need for a robust infrastructure to support data collection and storage. There's also a need for ongoing funding and support to maintain the study. Here, I'm sharing a few of the posters that we have the luck to present in NHAM Congress 2022. NHAM here stands for National Heart Association Malaysia, a meeting, Congress. So here, the first poster is titled as Association Between Anthropometric Factors and First-Onset Acute MI. So the objective is to determine the association of BMI and waist-hip ratio in Malaysian adults with first onset of MI. Results here we can see. In males, risk of having MI is 45% lower in underweight group compared to the normal BMI. Individuals aged more than 50 years old, those high BMI have 31% lower chances of developing MI compared to normal BMI. Men with abnormal waist-hip ratio are 2 times more likely to develop MI than men with normal waist-hip ratio. So the conclusion we can draw over here is general obesity has a lower association with onset of first MI. However, central obesity is independently related to the risk of developing MI with abnormal waist-hip ratio in men, showing twice the risk. The second poster here which I can show is titled as Elevated Lipoprotein A, another significant predictor of first-onset myocardial infarctions among Malaysian adults. The objectives of this poster was to examine the association between lipoprotein A and first-onset MI among Malaysian adults. The results, those with MI were 2.09 times more likely to have higher LPA, which here is defined as more than 30 milligram per deciliter. So the conclusion we can draw over here is elevated levels in lipoprotein A is an independent risk predictor of first onset of MI among Malaysians. Last, let me acknowledge for this study and give thanks to them. First of all is to the Newton Unku Omar Fund, and then to our medical research and ethics committees, the Maverick team from the UK part, Maverick team from Malaysia, which is the IMR data and sample collection and management team, and also our clinical collaborators. And with that, thank you very much. My email to contact is on the left bottom corner. If you have any query, feel free to email me. I'll try my best to address them well. And now I pass the floor back to our moderator, Naim. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhuan, for the comprehensive description of the study and for sharing some important findings. If there are any questions that you would like to ask about his presentation, kindly submit your questions using the link provided in the YouTube channel. Next, I would like to introduce our second speaker for today, Dr. Farah Huda Mohkiar. She obtained her medical degree from MS Ramayah College, Bangalore, India. Previously, she worked in a district hospital for 2 years and hair clinic for 3 years before coming to IMR. Her research field is NCD, and her current research project is identification and quantification of lipids through lipidomics. It is our great privilege to have Dr. Farah Huda with us to share her research. Her presentation title is the Maverick Study Research Program. Over to you, Dr. Farah. The screen is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Assalamualaikum and good morning. I am Farah Huda Mohkiar, Medical Officer from Cardiovascular Unit and MCRC IMR. Today, I'm going to give an overview of each project and publication under the Maverick Study Research Program. First, I would like to tell you what is the Maverick Study Program. Maverick Study Program is a cluster of downstream studies with multidisciplinary approaches to investigate the contributing risk factors of first myocardial infarction in Malaysian's population, aiming to find local evidence that can be translated into the clinical practice in Malaysia. So, this slide is to show an overall overview of our plan for the program, which is broadly divided into 4 parts. The first part is the recruitment of the participant, which is already completed. The second part is about the studies of the biomarkers and genetic profiling related to the myocardial infarction risk in the Malaysian population. We also analyzed the data from the Maverick study for the lifestyle factors and dietary intake, and also a cohort study of MI for this part. So throughout this presentation, I'll be talking briefly about the projects and publication in this part. In the third part, we will evaluate the findings from the studies, looking into assessing the biomarkers studied, subsequently developing the risk prediction score through an integrative omics approach. The final parts involves translation into clinical practice by finding the right intervention, such as biomarkers for screening for the right individual, such as for the age or gender or ethnic specific, and at the right time, which can be before or after first episode of MI. So as I said earlier, in this presentation, I will share the summaries of each project and publication under the program. So the projects are based on the biomarkers that are currently being studied, namely lipids, metabolites, multi-element analysis, also include genome-wide association study. Among publication, one study related to major adverse cardiovascular events or MACE in MI cases is currently under peer review, while 2 other manuscripts, which are lifestyle factors and dietary intakes in MI cases, are at the stage of data analysis. I'll be talking about the projects first. So the first lipid study is characterization of the lipids in relation to the acute myocardial infarction risk in Malaysian population by Dr. Sofia Rashika Ismail. This is a completed study. So the objectives of this study is to evaluate the overall characteristic of lipids associated with myocardial infarction risk in Malaysian populations, providing a further detailed identification and quantifications of lipids associated with cardiovascular risk factors. In this untargeted lipidomic approach, more than 400 lipid species were analyzed. around 600 serum from the Maverick participants were analysed using direct infusion liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. So in conclusion, this study summarized the biological variation of lipid profilings in different ethnic groups in Malaysia. It also outlined the lipid classes and species associated with the risk of MI in Malaysia, where the MI cases showed higher abundance of ceramide and sphingomyelins and a lower abundance of diglycerides and cardiolipins. Second is a method development, validation, identification and quantification of lipids through lipidomic approach. This is an ongoing study where we are still currently running the samples. So this study aims to develop a method for lipidomic analysis and for the establishment of the local cutoff values. Also to identify and quantify lipid biomarkers associated with cardiometabolic risk factors and disease. Using a targeted lipidomic approach, around 50 lipid species were analysed. Plasma of the Maverick participants were running through the ultra-performance liquid chromatography UPLC separation system in combination with triple quad MS. This study is expected to identify a lipid biomarkers for potential use in therapeutics. It is also a part of development of the integrated omic risk prediction score along with the findings from the genetics and metabolomic studies. Next is the evaluation of the lipids parameters with short-term and long-term mortality risk in individuals with first onset of myocardial infarction by Dr. Zhuan. The objective of this study is to determine incidence of short-term and long-term risk of mortality in MI cases. Second is to evaluate the association between lipoprotein A with the risk of mortality in MI cases. And thirdly, to evaluate the association between routine lipid parameters such as triglyceride, HDL and LDL with the risk of mortality in MI cases. This is a retrospective cohort study of the MI cases where the baseline database such as socio-demographic will be extracted from the National Cardiovascular Disease Database and also Maverick database. The outcome data, which is a mortality rate, will be acquired from the National Registration Department. This study is expected to evaluate the association of lipid levels in MI patients and the risk of mortality. The result also would strengthen the understanding of the prognostic effects of the dyslipidemia. Next is the multi-element analysis. So in this, we at the analysis of the multi-element levels in nails of myocardial infarction patients using inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry (ICP-MS). This study, led by Puan Roshan Jan, is currently at the stage of statistical analysis of the results. The aim of this study is to compare the multi-element levels in nails samples of MI cases and controls. Second is to establish a correlation between these elements investigated and the occurrence of MI in Malaysia. So the method is using the samples consisting of fingernails and toenails. These samples analysed for 13 selected elements using ICP-MS. These elements are arsenic, cadmium, chromium, cobalt, copper, iron, lead, manganese, mercury, nickel, selenium, vanadium and zinc. So this study is expected to show a relation between these elements and the greater probability of MI occurrence in Malaysia. The result will provide valuable information and measures to be taken to prevent or control the exposure and the disease. For metabolites, it will be a signature plasma metabolite in individuals with first-onset myocardial infarction using a targeted metabolomic approach by Mr. Muhammad Naim Muhammad Nawi. This project is currently still at the stage of proposal development. So the objective of this project is to evaluate the differences in the targeted metabolites in MI cases and control. Second is to identify and evaluate the metabolic signatures associated with the risk of mortality in MI cases. Using a targeted metabolomic approach, plasma of MI cases were analysed using gas chromatography and liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. It is expected to identify the fatty acids and amino acids discriminating the individuals with and without MI, which will then be evaluated for the association of the risk of mortality and will be used in the development of risk prediction score. Next is genome-wide association study of first-onset myocardial infarction in the Malaysian population. This study aims to characterize common genetic variants in MI cases and control. Second, to identify the genetic variants associated with the risk of MI in both non-coronary artery disease genes such as LDLR, PCSK9, and other genomic loci. This is a population-based genome-wide association study using Illumina Infinium Asian Screening Array. This study is expected to identify the genetic variants that increase the risk of MI compared to the general population, which then further promote the genetic exploration to improve the clinical risk assessment and the diagnostic of cardiovascular disease in Malaysia. So for publication, the lifestyle factors, anthropometry, and glycosylated hemoglobin or HbA1c among myocardial infarction patients in Malaysia by Dr. Nur Sufia Sulaiman is currently at the stage of data analysis. So this study aims to determine the association of lifestyle factors such as physical activity and smoking habit, anthropometric factors such as body mass index and waist-hip ratio, and the level of HbA1c in MI cases. This study will analyze the data from the Maverick Study questionnaire and sample analysis for HbA1c. It is expected to identify the lifestyle factor, anthropometric factors, and HbA1c associated with increased risk of MI in Malaysia. Next is the dietary fat consumption among first-onset myocardial infarction patients in Malaysia by Dr. Shazana Rifham Abdullah. This study aimed to compare the nutrient intakes such as carbohydrate, protein, and fat between MI cases and control. Second, to investigate the association of fat intakes with occurrence of MI among Malaysians. This study analysed the nutritional data from the food frequency questionnaire. It is expected to identify the differences in mean energy intakes per day, total carbohydrate, protein, total fat, and fat subtypes such as saturated fatty acids, monounsaturated fatty acids, and polyunsaturated fatty acids in between cases and control. It will also establish an association of fat intakes and the occurrence of myocardial infarction in Malaysia. Lastly, a cohort study of risk factor of secondary cardiovascular events in a Malaysian population with acute myocardial infarction by Dr. Sofia Rashika Ismail. This study currently under peer review in the MDPI Journal of Cardiovascular. The objective of this study is to investigate the incidence of major acute cardiovascular events or MACE and related risk factors after 1 year from the first onset of MI. Second is to evaluate the differences in risk factors for MACE across age, gender, and ethnic group. Around 1,600 Maverick MI participants were followed up to 1 year of the onset of the first MI. The outcome was the first incidence of non-fatal MACE or fatal MACE, which is any cardiovascular related death, within 1 year after the index MI. Some of the outcome are: MACE was observed in 14.3% individuals, including 5.7% of cardiovascular related death. Individual with arrhythmic complication such as second degree heart block, left bundle branch block demonstrated twice higher of MACE. So, summary of my presentation today. Maverick Study Program is a multidisciplinary approach investigating the risk factors of first myocardial infarction in Malaysian population, aiming to find local evidence for the right intervention for the right individual at the right time. So we also plan to develop the risk prediction score through the integrative omics approach by incorporating our findings from the lipidomic, metabolomic and genomic studies, which potentially can be used for disease prediction and stratification by local traits such as ethnicity. With that, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farah. Despite the various ongoing and planned efforts, you have clearly summarized each study. I look forward to the findings of all the planned studies, and if you would like to know specific or technical details about any particular projects presented, please leave your details so that the principal investigator, PI of the project, will be able to revert back. We will now be moving to the question Q&A session. Please do not hesitate to send us your questions using the link provided in the YouTube channel. And I will try my best to connect you to our distinguished speakers through the posted questions. Nevertheless, should the time does not allow us to address all the questions, our speakers will try their best to answer the questions through email. I think we have a few questions that has been posted by our viewers. The first question, I think this is relevant to Dr. Tan. Dr. Tan, why were the participants with concurrent cardiovascular disease excluded from the study? Anytime you're ready, you can start to answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the questions. So the concurrent CVD that actually is mentioned over here in the study is actually a broad term. What it means is that it includes things like MI, revascularization, PCI done, percutaneous intervention done, even stroke, even TIA. So all these CVD, concurrent CVD, actually they share some type of pathophysiology with MI. Mainly they're caused by atherosclerosis. So in this point, we have to exclude them because they may work as a confounding factors for our first MI cases. So that is the main reason we exclude them. I hope it answers the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tan. So I hope that to the viewers who asked the question, I hope Dr. Tan has managed to answer your question. We have another question, and I think this one is for Dr. Farah. Dr. Farah, the question is, what were those specific heavy metals studied? I think this is referring to the heavy metals project. Dr. Farah, anytime you're ready, you can start to answer.
Yes. In the multi-element analysis, I think I did mention just now the 13 those are the 13 elements selected for the heavy metal analysis, which already listed before. I added a bit why we selected those elements. These basically on the literature study which is mostly showed and pointing towards those relation of the selected elements toward the risk of the development of the cardiovascular disease, gathered from the clinical data, experimental data, and also from the epidemiological studies which shows a linear correlation of these elements and the development of the cardiovascular disease. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Farah. I think that is a comprehensive answer. And I hope to the viewers who asked the question, I hope Dr. Farah has managed to explain the answer to your question. We have another question. I think this is for Dr. Tan. Dr. Tan, why were there more Indians than Chinese participants in the study? So you can answer anytime.
Okay, thank you. You have very sharp eyes. So the thing is this, in the ethnicity of our Mavericks, we noticed that there is more than half which are Malays. However, for the Chinese and the Indians, actually the Indians predominate more than the Chinese. So we are Malaysians, we know the main three races, which are the Malays, Chinese and Indians. However, here, you have to keep in mind that we recruit the patient from the general hospitals. So this actually comes to show the disparity in choosing the hospitals, but the different ethnic, and also maybe the disparity in incomes as well in our ethnic groups. So that's one. Second, which we are thinking possible, because there are local literature that actually shows that Malays and the Indians, they are more predisposed to early onset of MI. As our study, we recruited, although we aim for more than 18 years old, we try to get less than 65 years old for our study. So maybe that's the reason why we have more Indians than the Chinese participants in the study itself.
Thank you, Dr. Tan. I hope that has explained why there are more Indians than Chinese participants in the Maverick study. I think we have another question for Dr. Farah. Dr. Farah, could you elaborate which types of secondary events were evaluated in the MAZE study?
So the secondary event which the outcome for non-fatal MAZE, it is any hospitalization which associated with heart failure or acute coronary syndrome. And for the fatal outcome of the fatal MAZE, there any mortality, cardiovascular related death mortality, such as second MI, major stroke, or any heart failure which lead to the mortality for the MAZE.
Thank you, Dr. Farah, for elaborating the types of secondary events evaluated in the MAZE study. I think we still have a few questions, and I think the next question is for Dr. Tan. Dr. Tan, why the interest in lipoprotein A since it is not routinely measured? So Dr. Tan, anytime you're ready, you can start.
Okay. Okay. First of all, I'll just go back to the clinical a bit. Okay. As we all well know, dyslipidemia or high lipids actually causes more of MIs and coronary artery disease and things like that. However, actually in the current clinical practice, mainly the routine lipid profile that we take are the HDLs, LDL, and the TGs, which is the triglycerides. And there's also a total cholesterol, which is a combination of all these. So keep in mind that these measurements help, but they are actually dynamic. What I mean by that is that it is easily changed. Things like, for example, you take a medication and then you change your diets, and even a stressful event, it can change these levels. So as for lipoprotein A, it is kind of like a new kid in town. It is kind of special in a way that it is static. The level will remain static in our body. It's more to genetically, determine when you're born, and you stay static all the while. So in that way, it can, hopefully, it may be actually work as an independent predictor of a CHD. And as like, for example, it may be also a non-modifiable risk factor itself. So that's the reason why lipoprotein A now itself, rather than affected by all these factors, we are so concerned. Because, for example, if you just say you go and do a routine checkup at some private clinics and all that for lipoprotein A, and then you show that you actually have higher compared to your friends, then as such, you can know things like, hey, do you know that I have 2 times more risk to get an MI compared to you, just based on that result alone. So that is why we are more interested in that right now. Hopefully, it can become something big in the future. Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Tan, for explaining about the potential usage of lipoprotein A in terms of, since it's not routinely measured. I think we have another 2 questions, and this is the final questions for Dr. Farah. So, Dr. Farah, why is there a lot of focus on lipid research? Dr. Farah, would you elaborate on this question?
Okay. Yes, as I presented just now, we have 3 lipid study: untargeted lipidomic, targeted lipidomic, and also the evaluation of the lipid parameters and the risk of mortality. So, as all of us know, lipids plays a major and crucial role in the development of cardiovascular disease. So, there's a few reason and factors why we are currently focused on lipids. First, in terms of the lipids and the development of atherosclerosis, or the formation of atheromatous plaque in the coronary vessel. This is the major underlying cause of the cardiovascular disease, and from here on the disease progress. And then second, there will be regarding the lipid management and the assessment of as of now at in our practice. Evaluation of lipid parameters such which are total cholesterol, triglycerides, LDL, and HDL is a fundamental test to evaluate the individual risk of cardiovascular disease. And then there's also regarding the lipid treatment right now, we are using statin mostly for the lipid treatment in our setup right now. So not many patients can achieve the optimal target for this lipid with this lipid lowering agent. So based on all of these reasons and factors, we are trying to understand more regarding the lipid metabolism, their interaction, and also finding a new therapeutic target for this. And then having said all of this, it's not in the exploration and in the part 2 that I explained just now, in the exploration and the analysis, we will still there's highly possibly that we will add more study regarding the genetic studies such as whole exome sequencing, whole genome sequencing related to CVD. Also, cohort study of the control cases to look for the incidence of SCS or MI. So, yeah, that's for future parts. Thank you.
I think we have another few questions. So, question for Dr. Tan. Dr. Tan, when the blood was taken, is the time when the blood is taken important in MI study? From Sharifah, UPM.
Okay. For this study per se, the blood was taken during the index admission itself. We try to take it as early as possible, but the thing is that for MI cases, they are normally acute cases, meaning that they have to undergo a lot of revascularizations and PCIs and things like that. So we'll try to get the blood as they stabilize, normally within 1-2 days, hopefully. As the second question just now, you are saying, will it affect our results and all? The answer is yes. It will definitely affect it. Like I said just now previously on the lipids profile and lipid parameters, we actually have literature supporting that even few hours of difference actually makes some differences in the readings and all. However, that's part of the limitations that we have to take into account when we analyze the results. So other than that, there are other fields, what you call bloods and results will be affected. But for example, lipoprotein A is not affected at all most of the time. So hopefully that answers the questions.
We have another question to Dr. Farah. So Dr. Farah, of all parts of body, why fingernail and toenails are chosen? Are there specific or scientific reasons behind it? I think this is a question from Siti from University of Wollongong. Dr. Farah, if you mind, please do answer this question.
Finger how to say, the heavy metals usually accumulated in the keratin-rich tissue, such as nails and hair. So we the reason we taken both fingernails and toenails, uh, there's studies that shows different in the levels of the concentration of these elements measured in regards to the whether it's from fingernails or toenails. So both of it depends on the route of administration or the exposure of the elements, such as from dietary or from exposure from the environmental mainly, and also the duration of the exposure difference in fingernails and toenails, as fingernails grow faster than the toenails.
I think we have one final question. I think this question is for Dr. Tan. Dr. Tan, this question is from Ms. Shura Wardazawani from MOH. During sampling, did you excluded febrile volunteers? And are there any molecular characterization carried out on the samples? In addition to that, she also asked, are the samples available for future research? And lastly, can other researchers access the samples and the metadata?
These questions, I think I may need your help to moderate. Okay, so for during sampling, do we exclude the febrile volunteers? Here, we exclude the febrile volunteers who are mainly their fever and all derived from infections and other diseases. Whereas if there are no other origins or cause can be identified and attributed solely to MI, we don't exclude them. As for the samples available for future research and all, we do have available samples for the future research. That is why we have extra samples. We have taken some, but then on current projects like what Dr. Farah actually has described and all, we are currently analyzing them and using them up for now. Hopefully, there are still some available samples. And can other researchers assess the data and the samples? For now itself, is mainly just IMR over here and also the Cambridge side of CEU. So after that, then we have to discuss and all, because we actually have a data access committee in collaboration together with Cambridge side. So if you do have any interest in assessing and all, you can email us and we can go through the DAC meetings and discuss on it, and maybe we can do so. As for molecular characterization, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe the moderator can help me out here.
In terms of molecular characterization, I wish that Ms. Shura can provide further clarification in terms of the exact question that she wants to know. So Ms. Shura, if you have the time, please do send us an email so that we have more information with regards to what exactly are you referring to here. I think that is the final question for Q&A session. I'm afraid that is all the time we have, and any additional questions will be answered by the speakers through email. And we hope that this webinar has shed light on some research work that we are conducting in IMR and would spark interest and could initiate research collaboration with others. And ladies and gentlemen, now we have come to the end of the webinar session. I would like to thank all participants for their support to make this session successful. Don't forget to subscribe to our National Institute of Health Malaysia YouTube channel. We hope you can join us at the next session. And until then, many thanks from all of us at IMR. Take care and stay safe.